Okay, the continued comedy of errors that also has a major humanitarian death toll, right? So we don't want to merely call it a comedy of errors. Russia has apparently shot down their own $36 million bomber jet, an airplane. This is according to Ukraine. There's a Newsweek article explaining it. A $36 million Russian Su-34 bomber was reportedly shot down by Russia's own forces over Ukraine's eastern Luhansk region, according to Ukrainian media outlets yesterday. The jet was reportedly down near Alchevsk, a city in the Luhansk region. This is where the war is currently focused, and Alchevsk is currently under the occupation of Moscow-backed separatist forces. A video and images shared by the Strategic Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on the Telegram messaging app appear to show the charred remains of a Russian Su-34 fighter bomber. Now, there's some confusion about this because there were reports that the picture of a non-destroyed bomber is not actually of the Su-34. And there's some debate as to whether the reporting is showing the right planes or whether the reporting is describing the right planes. It appears to be that it is an Su-34, but that some of the images are not actually of that plane, which makes you wonder, it makes you wonder a number of different things. Although I believe that this picture that I'm showing you is of the Su-34. These types of accidents actually do happen in war. It's not the strangest thing. And when you get over 100 days, right? I mean, we're into month 4 at this point of a war where neither side is dramatically well organized when it comes to air warfare. There's similar looking equipment on both sides. It's not the most unheard of thing, but at the same time, we don't currently know exactly how this plane was shot down. Was it shot down by ground fire? You would think that any air defense missiles would be checking for identifiers where planes have an identifier. I guess if the identifier system malfunctioned or if it didn't work, maybe Russian troops thought this was an enemy bomber and they shot it down as a result. But it's a good opportunity to kind of zoom out and talk about what's going on in Ukraine, bigger picture. And it's not good. And I've spoken with you before about how the stories that make good stories for corporate media are stories that have a relatively clearly defined beginning, middle, and end. And if you think back to coverage of the Iraq War in 2003 and the lead up, you had making the case for the war. That was a clear, like a pre-war phase. And that included the testimony before Congress, which included faulty intelligence, as we now know. It included George W. Bush making the case and ultimately George W. Bush announcing the start of the war. And then it went to missiles and the entire thing, the actual meat of the war coverage. And then you had the mission accomplished banner. And even though after that is when most of the civilian and military casualties took place, after the mission accomplished moment, there was less coverage of the war as an event that is ongoing. It became background at that point. And this is why, and I know many of you have heard this already, but I think it's important to understand and for me to explain how a lot of these corporate media narratives kind of work. If you have a story like hunger deaths among African children, which is sort of like your prototypical tragedy in the sense that it's always going on. And there's a question of, well, when and how is it covered? It's ongoing. And this is why the constant deaths of children from hunger in Africa don't get the attention in Western media as 1 or 2 people killed in a school shooting, as an example. Doesn't mean any of the deaths are any more or less tragic. And in terms of preventability, that's a whole other conversation to have as well. But with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, we are now kind of in that middle phase. And that middle phase can be very, very long. And at this point, you can make the case that nothing new is happening. Now, every time bombs are dropped, every time an apartment building is bombed, every time people are killed, those are new things that are happening. It's just as tragic when person 100 and 1,000 is killed as when it's person number 1. But the stories start to blend and people start to say, well, weren't they already in the Luhansk region? Was this the Donetsk or what was it? And I think the infirmary or the nursery was already bombed. This one's in a different place. And so the coverage we're seeing in corporate media starts to reflect that. Prototypical. For independent shows like ours, the challenge becomes how to continue covering it, given that the resources of shows like ours to have people on the ground are dramatically more limited. And so to a certain degree, we are reacting to the coverage that is taking place, which is certainly diminished at this point. But the latest news is that this is sort of the individual element of the story. Russia apparently shooting down one of its own fighter jets, and we could call it a comedy of errors and stop there if it weren't so tragic.